What is up? What is going on? Welcome back to the COVID-19 War Room. So happy that you found us. If you're from a different class, welcome. If you're from a different district, a special welcome to you. Love the fact that there's other people checking these videos out, getting them some help as they get through this COVID-19. And if we're already out of it, if we're done, hey, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully I can teach you a little bit about the Civil War. Today, it's the last one. It's the last video of the Civil War. Today we're talking about Texas's role, the role that Texas played in the Civil War, and then we have to end this thing. We have to figure out who won. How did it happen? All that. So without further ado, let's jump into the computer. So Texas is going to play a huge role in this Civil War, mainly because of the trade route that they have from Mexico. If you know anything about the Civil War, which you should because you've been watching these videos, you know that there's no supplies coming from anywhere in the United States. The Union has everything blockaded, and they've now cut off the Mississippi River, and so it's a challenging time for the Confederate States of America and the Confederate Army. So Texas is going to play a huge role because they're going to set up trade routes to Mexico. And so as these trade routes are developed, they're going to be able to get more and more supplies into the country, into the state, the Confederate States of America, and boost the war effort that much more. So a couple battles that happened in Texas during this Civil War. Number one, we have the Battle of Galveston. So we talked about that Anaconda Plan and them kind of shutting off any sort of supply line and port that they could. And so naturally the Union ships come in to blockade all of the Texas ports. So at this moment, like we talked about those trade routes through Mexico, cotton is being transported into Mexico and then sent by ship into Europe, and so then Europe is sending back guns, ammunition, supplies, and things like that the Confederate States can use. They don't really have a dog in the fight, neither Mexico nor Europe, but they're benefiting from the Civil War. So in October 1862, the Union forces attack and capture Galveston to try to cut off that stronghold and cut off that supply line in and out of Texas and Mexico. But in 1863, so October, November, December, January, so 3-4 months later, Texas is going to take it back, and they now own Galveston and occupy Galveston. And so there's just you see this ever evolving jockeying for position and jockeying for where they can cut off the Confederate States supplies. And so the ability to take Galveston back is going to be huge for the Confederacy. Then we have Sabine Pass, kind of a same situation. The Union is going to be trying to capture Sabine Pass. If you don't know what that is, here's a little picture of it. Between Texas and Louisiana, there's what's called the Sabine Pass into the Sabine Lake. So you can get off the Gulf of Mexico and in here and kind of up into Louisiana or up further in Texas. We'll get to that slide here in a minute. So the Union is going to try to come in and take the Sabine Pass. And so you got Captain Dick Dowling and Davis Guards play a major role by capturing 350 soldiers and 2 boats. Another Confederate victory here, keeping those supply lines open, keeping it able to get stuff into the Confederate States of America, which is again playing a huge role keeping this war going, keeping supplies coming in, keeping everybody healthy, supplied, fed is going to be a huge deal. So how did it all go? Okay, so if you look over here at this picture here, not the one on the right, but the one on the left, you see the Confederate boats come off of Sabine Lake right here, and they kind of show themselves a little bit here and then come around this oyster reef, which is 2 feet of water. Now they know where they're going, and so they're able to kind of navigate this even better. And so they basically get these ships into a ring around the rosy kind of move here, and they're able to capture them all and take the victory of Sabine Pass. So, 1863, while we're in the year, let's talk about this Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln delivers to everybody, really. But he's mainly talking to the slaves that are still in existence. And so Lincoln is basically going to free all the slaves, give an order to free all the slaves, pass some legislation that slaves are now free in the Confederate States. Just one problem there, Lincoln. The Confederate States don't answer to you anymore. So when he says this, like, hey, all the slaves are free, basically what he's doing is just making the continued war effort about slavery, which is fine. I'm not holding that against him, but you can't really expect the Confederate States to listen to you and, oh man, Lincoln passed this legislation. He made this proclamation. We gotta let everybody go. No, they left you. They left the United States. They left your world because they didn't want to listen to you. They didn't want to follow your rules anymore. So how are you going to pass another rule and expect them to follow it? So it was just kind of interesting there that he was trying to free all the slaves in the Confederate States, which we'll get to in a minute. As far as the Civil War ending in April 1865, we're not there yet. Just kind of a timeline here deal. And then June 19th, 1865 is the day that Texas slaves are released. Some 182,500 people released and freed in Texas, and that was a big day for slavery. And it's still a holiday today, Juneteenth. You'll see it somewhere around the 19th. Depending on when and where it falls in the calendar. So Emancipation Proclamation continued, like we talked about. Lincoln makes this war about slavery now. It's now the focus, right? You're fighting to end slavery. And so I think that's where people get confused with, like, what were the causes of it. Slavery was an underlying cause, but states' rights was the real cause. So if it supposedly frees the slaves in the Confederate States, but again, we're not. The Confederate States are not listening to them. They're not a part of the United States. So how does it free them, right? Theoretically, it does, but it doesn't in real life. The craziest thing is that this does not apply to areas occupied by the Union or the states where slavery is still permitted that have stayed into the Union. So you've got some border states. If you think back to that map, there were some states that did not enter the Confederate States of America. They kind of stayed with the Union, but they still had slavery. And so this doesn't free the slaves in there. So it's kind of an interesting proclamation that he makes, being that, number one, he no longer has control of the Confederate States of America, and he's trying to make demands for them to follow. Number two, you're talking that the states that are still under your control, they don't have to follow the same rules. So it's an interesting proclamation that Lincoln makes. And another thing that it does, and probably the most important, is it discourages Great Britain from supporting and joining the Confederacy. So, being that Lincoln is able to make this about slavery, it's going to kind of open Britain's eyes or show them a different light, and they say, "Whoa! We don't want anything to do with slavery. We're not a fan of that. We don't support that. So we're not going to join in." There's a lot of people that think, me included, had Great Britain joined the Confederate States of America's effort, probably a good chance the South wins the war. just because of the supplies that they are able to bring, the men, everything like that. The Army, the training, the Navy. The Navy would have been a huge deal. British Royal Navy at this point is one of the strongest in the world. So when you talk about lifting those blockades or moving them, getting those ships out of the way, Britain would have played a huge role in that. But this proclamation discourages them from joining, and they stay out of it. And so we get the result that we do. So in this freed slaves, right, the quote-unquote freed slaves, slavery was tough as it ended. I mean, it was great that it did end for the slaves and everything like that, but there wasn't a whole lot of resources that slaves had, right? They didn't have any hospitals, schools, money, jobs, homes, and it's going to, include a huge racial divide in the war. So when the war finally does end in 1865, you're going to have this kind of crazy time in America. So Lincoln's elected in 1864, re-elected for his second term. Obviously, the North is going to support Lincoln. They're all about it. And so President Jefferson Davis flees Richmond. They burn it to the ground. General Lee surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th, 1865. So the war is effectively over at this point. The South has surrendered. They've told them, hey, we can't win. We're out of here. And then Ulysses S. Grant makes a generous and questionable determination. He's going to pardon all of the soldiers that were participating in this war. And we'll see that kind of when we start talking about Reconstruction, which is the time after the war. But for him to pardon these people, it's an interesting move there. So here's Appomattox. I'm sure you've seen maybe some pictures. That's back in the day. This is it today. It looks like just a regular old courthouse, but there's a lot of history that went there. And then we thought the war was over. Nobody told the Texans, or the Confederate soldiers in Texas. So where did Texas, what role did they play in this? It's actually a pretty funny one. Texas was the official last battle in the Civil War. It was after the Civil War ended, but it was the last battle in the Civil War. So Battle of Palmetto Ranch, if we look back, surrender on April 9th, 1865. May 12th, 1865, so a month and 3 days later, there's another battle after the war is basically over. Everybody surrendered, everybody's going home. Nobody told the Texans. So Palmetto Ranch is near Brownsville. Confederate soldiers had no idea that that the war was over, that they had basically lost and surrendered. And so they're going to continue fighting, and they're going to fight some Union soldiers who really don't put up that much of a fight. They take them prisoner, and then as soon as they can get close enough, the Union guys are like, what are y'all doing? They're like, what do you mean we're taking you prisoner? And they said, the war's over. What are you talking about? The war's over. And the war's not over? Yeah, Lee surrendered like a month ago. Oh, man, are you serious? Yeah, you lost, bro. You got to go. Oh, man, okay. So that was the official battle, or official end of the Civil War. After the war, April 1865, the North had no plan on how or why or what to do about Reconstruction. So you've got the South that, they've surrendered. You've got to put the nation back together, and the North has no idea what to do with them, with the states, with the citizens, anything like that. So they're sitting there arguing about everything, and then Lincoln gets assassinated. Lincoln gets assassinated by John Wilkes Booth at the Ford Theater in Washington, D.C. He is killed. Wilkes Booth escapes. He is later trapped by the Union cavalry and shot. 7 million people pay their respects to Lincoln's funeral train, which is insane. 7 million people. So April 14th, 1865, shortly after that war is over, John Wilkes Booth kills Lincoln and escapes. Effects on the Civil War for Texas. So this is going to cripple the economy of the South. I mean, not only Texas, but all of the South. So when you release a labor force, whether justified or we like it or not, right? The slaves were the labor force, and so when you release that, when you no longer have that labor force, you're not growing. You're not able to grow as much crops and things like that you were able to in the past, and so that's going to cripple the economy. Not to mention all that Confederate money, stocks, bonds, and everything that everybody had, put their life savings into to buy or acquire is now worthless. So imagine today, right now, you have $100,000 US. Yeah, you're doing pretty good. That's saved up. You still got your paycheck coming in, whatever, but you've saved up $100,000 US dollars. Okay, and then all of a sudden, overnight, one day, your money is no longer in existence. So now you have nothing. And that's basically what was happening in the Confederacy. So all these people that were, rich in the Confederacy didn't have any money in the United States because they had Confederate currency. And while it was valuable then, it's not valuable anymore. So needless to say, the South was in financial ruins, and Texas had lost more than 20,000 soldiers in the Civil War. So how does it affect everybody? How do lives change? And we'll talk about this when we get to Reconstruction. But we get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment out of the Civil War and an ending in Reconstruction. So if you need an easy way to remember it, 13, 14, 15, free citizens vote. So the 13th Amendment freed all enslaved people. The 14th Amendment gave them citizenship. Anybody that was a slave was now a citizen. And the 15th Amendment gave them the right to vote, or basically you could not deny the person a right to vote based on their skin color, their race, or their previous slavehood. It says servitude, but that's basically, it means that they were previously a slave. So free citizens vote, that's the way I remember it. Have for years, free citizens vote, 13, 14, 15. And that's it. Congratulations. You're done with another unit. You were done with the Civil War unit. You've been through everything that we teach here in Texas history. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you need anything from us, please let us know. We're here to help. We'll be happy to do it. And we'll see you in the next one.